I never thought a single HOA officer could humiliate me in my own neighborhood, but that morning proved otherwise. I was walking through the community clubhouse to attend a routine meeting. My ID clipped to my lanyard like any responsible resident. I was calm, prepared, ready to comply with whatever HOA formality awaited. But then I saw her, Karen. The moment she spotted me, her eyes narrowed, lips curling into that smug, superior smile that had haunted residents for years. "I don't know who you think you are," she said loudly, gesturing at my ID, "but you don't belong here. Hand it over." The room froze. Residents whispered. Kids playing outside stopped mid-step. Her HOA badge glinted like a sword as she reached for my identification. I felt a cold surge of anger mixed with disbelief. She was serious. She believed she had the authority to decide whether I, a law-abiding resident, had the right to exist in the very space I paid to live in. I tried reasoning calmly. "Karen, this is my ID. I live here. I've followed every rule." Her voice escalated, filled with that venomous mix of self-righteousness and entitlement. "Rules? You think following rules matters here? You don't belong. Hand it over now." Before I could react, she snatched the ID from my hand and waved it as if it were a trophy. The audacity made my blood boil. She had no idea who I was. But as she held my ID triumphantly in the air, a small smirk formed at the corner of my mouth. Because what she didn't know, what no one in that room could see, was that I ran the very Oversight, agency that monitors every action of her. HOA, every fine she issued, every rule she twisted, every threat she made, it all fell under my jurisdiction. And right now, Karen had just handed me the ultimate evidence of her recklessness. While she continued to berate me, the adrenaline coursing through me sharpened every thought. This wasn't about revenge yet, it was about strategy. Every move she made would be documented, reported, and used to ensure she could never humiliate another resident like this again. She was about to learn that entitlement has consequences, and her authority was fragile, especially when the person she targeted had the power to oversee her entire operation. The whispers in the room grew louder as I assessed my options. I had to act smart, not emotional. One wrong move, and she could spin the story, claim victimhood, or manipulate other board members. But one right move, and she'd be the one answering questions, not me. The realization hit me. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Karen's smug expression had only grown as she held my ID high, like she was displaying some sort of victory. "See? This proves you don't belong here," she sneered. "You're not authorized for this area, not in this meeting, not anywhere under my HOA's watch." Her voice carried through the room, echoing off the walls, and I could feel every resident's eyes on us. Some looked shocked, some uncomfortable, and a few were smirking, sensing the tension. She thrived on that attention, basking in the fear and submission she believed she commanded. I stayed calm, letting her arrogance hang in the air for a few seconds longer than necessary. Every second Karen remained unaware of who I was, the more evidence I collected in my mind. Every gesture, every word, every shaky attempt to assert dominance was a mistake she couldn't undo. I could see her starting to overplay her hand, her finger pointing, the clipboard shaking slightly, as if her confidence was cracking under the weight of her own aggression. "I need you to hand that back now," I said, voice measured, calm but firm. My eyes locked on hers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell, but there was a steel beneath my words she couldn't ignore. Karen tilted her head, clearly assessing whether she could intimidate me into compliance. And for a moment she paused, just long enough for me to feel the shift. I subtly reached for my phone in my pocket, activating the voice recorder. Every word, every motion, every abusive threat she issued would be preserved. This wasn't just about my ID anymore. It was documentation for her accountability. She had no idea the person she was humiliating had the legal authority to scrutinize her every action. I felt a strange satisfaction, not in revenge, but in the certainty that the tables were about to turn. Karen scoffed, stepping closer, ignoring the murmurs from the audience. "Do you think just saying 'give it back' works here?" she asked, smirking, leaning into the air of control she thought she owned. I didn't answer. I let her continue, knowing that her continued aggression only strengthened my position. The more she spoke, the more she revealed about her abuses of power, and the stronger my case became. Then came the moment that changed the dynamic. I calmly removed my lanyard, held up my ID, and said, "Karen, you have no idea who you're holding this for." Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The room grew silent. Every whisper stopped. Even her loyal followers seemed to hesitate. I had her attention now. Karen's eyes widened the instant I spoke. That smug certainty she wore like armor began to crack. For the first time, she seemed unsure. hesitating mid-sentence as she realized she might have underestimated me. The room, once filled with whispers and murmurs, now hung in stunned silence. Everyone present could feel the shift. The bully of the HOA, Karen, was facing someone who not only refused to be intimidated, but had the authority to hold her accountable. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, keeping my tone calm but firm. I oversee the agency that monitors your HOA operations. Everything you've done, every fine, every threatened lien, every act of intimidation is within my jurisdiction. The weight of the words hit her visibly. Her clipboard, once gripped tightly like a weapon, now trembled in her hands. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, to assert her dominance, but the room was no longer hers to command. She realized the narrative had shifted, and in that pause I saw her panic. The murmurs in the room grew, but this time in disbelief rather than approval. Residents who had been terrified of Karen's wrath now watched her falter, some even exchanging subtle smirks of relief. The power dynamics had flipped in an instant. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, desperately searching for a way out, a justification that could salvage her authority. But there was none. She had overplayed her hand by targeting someone who held ultimate oversight over her actions. I extended my hand slowly, not threateningly, just to reclaim my ID. Give it back. Karen, you've made enough mistakes for one day. Her hands shook as she hesitated. I could see the internal battle raging, ego versus reality. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she returned the ID, her face pale and eyes darting nervously. The gesture was small, but it signified surrender, the acknowledgement that her control over the situation was gone. The pharmacist in the room, who had been quietly observing, let out a soft exhale of relief. He hadn't known the full story, but even he recognized the tension that had gripped the air. Karen, meanwhile, tried to compose herself, brushing off the incident, but the evidence was already recorded. Every gesture, every threat, every overreach, captured. She had just handed me proof that would ensure accountability. And for the first time, I felt a sense of justice begin to take shape. Even as I secured my ID back in its rightful place, I knew the confrontation was only beginning. Karen might have returned my ID, but her arrogance, her abuse of power, and her delusions of authority would all be scrutinized. This was not revenge. It was oversight, and she was about to face the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. Today was the start of her reckoning. After Karen reluctantly returned my ID, the atmosphere in the clubhouse remained tense. She slumped slightly in her chair, trying to regain composure. But her usual aura of dominance was gone. The room, once filled with whispers of fear at her presence, now carried an undercurrent of curiosity and relief. Residents who had been silently suffering under her authoritarian style exchanged knowing glances. It was clear they finally saw her for what she truly was, a bully overstepping her bounds. I took a seat across from her, keeping my posture calm but authoritative. My ID was securely clipped back to my lanyard, and I made no move to conceal my awareness of her mistakes. I let the silence linger, giving her time to comprehend that her usual tactics would no longer intimidate me. Karen tried to speak, offering weak justifications and rehearsed excuses about rules and responsibilities, but the words fell flat. The power in the room had shifted, and she could sense it. Her veneer of control was cracking with every passing second. Pulling out my phone, I began documenting the interaction carefully, making mental notes of every abusive gesture, every manipulative statement. This wasn't about personal revenge, it was about accountability. Karen's actions, once unchecked, now had consequences. Every record I created could be used to prevent future abuses, ensuring no resident would endure the same humiliation. My role wasn't simply to reclaim my own dignity. It was to create a framework of oversight that would protect the entire community. As the meeting progressed, I subtly engaged with other board members. I shared observations and guidance, highlighting procedural oversights without directly confronting Karen yet. She realized the room had become collaborative, a space where authority was shared and not dictated by fear. Her attempts to dominate faltered, as residents quietly asked questions, sought clarifications, and leaned toward transparency instead of intimidation. She could see that her influence was evaporating, leaving only the hollow echoes of her previous authority. Karen's expressions shifted from smugness to irritation, and finally to thinly veiled panic. Her attempts to regain control, pointing at minor infractions, raising her voice, waving her clipboard, were ignored or politely countered. She was trapped in a web of her own making. I maintained calm, observing her reactions, making mental notes, and ensuring that every move she made would be documented for oversight purposes. Today had shown her that unchecked power is fleeting, and accountability can emerge even in the places she thought were hers alone. By the end of the meeting, Karen's posture was defeated. She left the room abruptly, murmuring excuses, and the community felt a collective sigh of relief. But I knew this was only the beginning. She had underestimated me, underestimated the very system designed to prevent abuse, and that mistake would define the coming weeks. The groundwork had been laid, and her reckoning was inevitable. The following days were a whirlwind of oversight actions, reports, and quiet strategy. Karen, still unaware of the full scope of my role, continued to try asserting her authority over minor HOA matters. Each attempt was met with procedural checks, documentation requests, and polite but firm guidance from me. The difference was palpable. What once would have terrified residents now fell flat, and Karen's confidence eroded further with every denied overreach. I reviewed her past actions meticulously, cross-referencing fines, notices, and complaints. The pattern was clear: repeated misuse of authority, arbitrary enforcement, and intimidation tactics. I compiled a comprehensive dossier, ensuring that every incident was backed by evidence and properly documented. My goal was not to humiliate, but to protect the residents and establish accountability that could withstand any legal or administrative scrutiny. Karen had made a critical mistake, targeting someone who had the power to scrutinize and correct every single misstep. When I scheduled a formal oversight review, Karen's reaction was immediate and telling. Her smugness faltered as I outlined the agenda: review of all fines issued, scrutiny of enforcement actions, and evaluation of her compliance with HOA policies. Residents and board members were present, asking informed questions, and Karen was visibly cornered. Her usual tactics, loud interruptions, dismissive gestures, and threats were now transparent and ineffective. The control she had wielded for so long had evaporated, replaced by transparency, accountability, and structured oversight. During the review, I presented my findings clearly and calmly. I highlighted the systemic problems, pointing out patterns of abuse without personal vindictiveness. Karen struggled to respond. Her words sounded rehearsed, defensive, and ultimately powerless. Every resident in the room could see the truth. Her authority had been inflated by fear, and that fear no longer existed. The board voted unanimously on measures to ensure oversight would remain independent, and Karen was formally reprimanded and placed under review for her conduct. By the end of the process, Karen left the room defeated, clutching her clipboard like a relic of a past era. The atmosphere shifted. Residents felt empowered, relieved, and validated. I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but had ensured that the HOA's power structure could no longer be abused without consequence. Karen's arrogance had led her to target the wrong person, and that mistake had rewritten the rules. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson was not just about authority or revenge. It was about vigilance, documentation, and courage. Power is fleeting when unchecked, and accountability is inevitable when the right person is watching. Karen may have tried to assert dominance, but in doing so, she revealed the very flaws that would ensure her oversight, and her reputation would never be unchecked again.